What's going on, y'all? It's your boy back. So today we're gonna be talking about something extremely serious. All right. The energy of this video is going to be definitely more. Uh, it's just gonna be a deeper video, man. A lot of the joking and stuff. I'm really not going to be including in this video because this shit is not a joke. Um, I want to give a disclaimer before we start talking about anything here. I said a little bit of this in my last video, but I want to direct it in this video since this is the topic. I don't care whether you believe in this or not. Okay, if you decide to practice something that you hear from me, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do things. If you pick up this book and you learn, that's your own decision. Okay, I'm not telling anybody what to do regarding this. Okay, I'm gonna tell you to take it serious. Whether you are a skeptic or you have faith already in something, and you think that what you know is the end all be all, take this shit serious. Okay, because this shit's not a joke. Um, and there are countless stories of terrible things happening to people, and I will explain some of my personal stories of terrible things that happened to me. There's some good things as well, but let's start with the history of the book. So this book, the Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon, was compiled in the 17th century. The author was Johann, I believe Ware, was somebody who compiled a lot of manuscripts and text from older centuries, but it was put together in the 17th century. It really got its claim to fame from Aleister Crowley as far as in modern recent times. Some of the things that happened to him. He was out in the desert trying to summon a spirit of the abyss. Okay. He took his disciple out there with him, somebody who he was teaching, his protege out there with him. And there's tools that you have to have when you set these things up. Protective circles, things that keep you safe as you can be when you deal with stuff like this. Now, the spirit he was calling wasn't necessarily one in this book, but it's very similar energy, and both people left psychologically fucked up. Okay, things physically appear. It's not in the beginning stages. You have to use this. You have to use these. But if you do shit right and you're consistent, you will see things. So the book, like I said, was established around that time, and it's a text of the 72 demons. I once again don't agree with that term, but for how everybody else will view it, 72 demons that King Solomon commanded to build his temple. And all of these 72 have different purposes, have different things that they do. They have different ranks. Some of them are presidents, dukes. There's levels to this, kings, and I'll explain the ones that I've worked with. I'm not going to speak on all 72. I don't have time for that, and nor do I wish to give all 72 of them attention. I really don't wish to give any of them attention, to be quite honest with you. This is not what I practice anymore. I have experience with this, but, back to that disclaimer. I'm sorry, this is a long disclaimer, but it's this fucking serious, I promise. Do as you will. You guys want to learn after Crowley, and that was his saying, do as you will. And be prepared to wear the scars of the shit you guys are putting out or calling or fucking with. Nothing in here is positive. Okay, I'm going to tell you that right now. There are positive experiences that you can gain from this, for sure. But once again, it's the concept of fire. Okay, these are not people. They don't have personalities in the way that me and you understand people. They are like fire. The fire is going to burn your house down, or it's going to cook you food. Who started the fire, and how are you controlling it? How are you maintaining it? That's the analogy I'm going to give you. So once again, this is what the book looks like. This is one copy of the book. Okay. Real quick, I'll show you my levels of work. And this was very early on, This is what is called ceremonial magic, meaning there is a ceremony behind a lot of this. It's high magic. There are things you have to do. There's a preparation. There's setup. There's tools involved. There's evocations. There's things spoken, and all of these things matter. And for my beginning period working with this, I came to it from skepticism with no guidance from anybody. And I didn't care to look up what anybody said. If you're here, you're already doing more than I did. Because I didn't give a fuck what anybody else had to say. I said, yeah, I'm not going to believe this person. I got to see it. And I did. This was the main spirit that I worked with. Now, this is going to be pretty controversial now, because at the time, nobody really understood the gravity of this spirit. The kind of people that work with this spirit. People didn't know. But because of, and I've got to draw a quick correlation and then explain the difference. Because of the Epstein files and Clintons and some of the people in power, the name Baal, the name Moloch have come to the surface in the media, in social media. This is who I worked with, and I worked with him for a good long time. I can't say years, but, consistently for about 1.5 years. And he taught me some things. First, I will explain what he does and kind of explain the text in the book, how it's formatted, because I know all of you are not going to pick up this book, and that is the wise decision. I'm also going to leave some of the evocations or things like that out, because I'm not trying to call anything or get attention from anything. So Baal, or Baal, is more of the French twist on his name. The original name was Baal. He was a Canaanite god, worshipped back in the day through human sacrifice. He was fertility. He would bring rain. He would bring, crops, fertility, all of these things, birth. Baal, the first principal spirit, is a king ruling in the east called Baal. He maketh thee go invisible. He ruleth over 66 legions of infernal spirits. He appear in diverse shapes, sometimes like a cat, sometimes like a toad, and sometimes like a man, sometimes all at once. He speaketh hoarsely. This is his character, which is to be worn as a layman before him who calleth, or else he will not do the homage. So the reason I paused at horse is because I have heard his voice, and I can't explain to you how decrepit it sounds. I'm not even going to make an attempt. I thought I was going to try there, but it would be insulting. It is truly otherworldly, and you get fucking chills, and you'll be looking over your shoulder, and you can feel it in the room. He's not a clean spirit. Beelzebub is more known for the infestations of flies. He's known as Lord of the Flies, but Baal will bring those nasty sort of things in as well. Now, I worked with him for a while, and once again, I didn't approach this from a ceremonial standpoint. I thought he was going to be my friend. It tells you the level of intelligence I had at the time, my understanding at the time. And he did things for me, and I did things for him, but they truly work under contract. Every spirit here. They are not your friend. They are contractual. If you do this, then I will do this. And if you don't do your part of it, God help you. And he won't. Because you made the agreement. People want to think that you can make these pacts and you can make these fucking agreements, and then when you get what you want, or you can't deliver on the thing that you said you were going to do, that you could just turn back to Allah or Jesus or God. You can, and they might have mercy on you. I'm not saying that. But they're going to allow certain things to happen because you invited that in. That spirit goes, no, 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 no. We made a deal. We had an obligation. Fuck that, you know. And once again, if that's a door you guys wish to open into your lives, then that's the book, you know. Once again, I'm telling you, I will always keep things real on this channel. This was the video you guys wanted, you know, and so I'm gonna give you the information. It's nothing in here is positive. Once again, he taught me how to play music. I taught myself guitar in under a week, and I was writing my own music. It was beautiful. I was writing stuff that I didn't understand, you know, and there were side effects to this. I wasn't sleeping. You know, I was awake for 2 or 3 days at the time. No drugs involved besides weed, heavy marijuana use. But, you know, that's not going to keep me awake for 3 days. I had no lights in my apartment. Not in my apartment. I lived in a little single studio to myself in the backyard of someone else's house. Like a mother-in-law suite, you know, or I can't remember what it's called. A little detached spot, you know. And, my rent at the time was $650, and I didn't have to work. Money came, you know. Excuse me, my alarm is going off. Money came, and it wasn't a lot because there wasn't a contract made, you know, but it was enough to where I always had my rent and food, and you know, go out to dinner a couple times a month. You know, I was solid. Now here is the cost. For one, my sleep. Your mind does weird things when you're up that long. You begin to hear things, you know, a little better if you have that connection. But it's not pleasant. You know, you feel like shit. The other side is I became very antisocial. Extremely antisocial. In that I didn't want anybody around me. You know, I was selling weed at the time. I didn't want people to come over to my spot. You're not coming to kick it. You know, nah, bro, like, you know, I'll meet you out front. You know, even my day ones, like, good friends, like, you know, we'd go out and chill, but y'all not coming back to my spot. I've got an altar set up with a cow skull and fucking, you know, shit everywhere. Like, I'm not explaining it to you. You know, plus there was a vibe in the room. You know, the few times I did have people come over, even when I covered it up, people could feel it. You know, there was it was like when you walk in a room and you could just tell you're not alone. And it's not even necessarily, it doesn't even always feel spiritual. Like, you know, if you walk into a crowded room, you know, with your back, you just tell there's a bunch of people there. You know, it was kind of like that. So became very antisocial, and my mood changed. I wasn't angry or mean, but I was just distant, you know, if that makes sense. So that was Ball. You know, those were the things that came with him, and some of the things that I got out of it. You know, at some point, I had a actual. You have to use what's called a sigil or a sigil. Depends on how you want to, you want to address that. But in a lot of these cases with these spirits, you have to have a layman, which is a necklace or something that you wear with his symbol on it. You know, and I had one handmade in like Norway or something, you know, forged and shit. And the day that I went to go take all of his stuff, I decided I was done. I was going to go take all of his stuff out. I never lost that necklace. Not one time. It stayed on his altar. The day that I decided I was going to go put all that stuff in the woods somewhere, bury it and be done, it disappeared. It was gone. And when I moved, I took everything out of that single story little spot. It was not in there. Excuse me real quick. I'm going to take a drink. So that was the spirit that I did probably the most with, but that was not the first. The first one came when I was about 14 or 15, and his name was Caimio, Caimio. Now let me find him real quick because I haven't looked at his name in a long time, and I'll explain the draw with him, you know, because it wasn't all negative. 1 second. I did not come prepared. see. If I don't find it in 2 seconds, I'm just going to speak on what I know about it. It should be right here. I'm not cutting any of this shit out in the video too. Y'all are gonna sit here and wait with me until I find this shit. Alright, I'm not gonna keep looking. So this spirit would teach you to communicate with animals. And that was something that was really, really cool to me. I really liked that idea. And while it wasn't as intense as you guys might, imagine, it's not like, here he goes right here. Jeez. Sorry, I had to go through 53 of them. So Cameo or Game, the 53rd spirit he is a great president and appears in the form of a bird called a thrush at first. But afterwards, he putteth on the shape of a man carrying in his hand a sharp sword. He seemeth to answer in burning ashes or in coals and fire, which is true. I did hear from him in fire. I never tried coals or ashes. His office is to give unto men the understanding of all birds, lowing of bullocks, barking of dogs and other creatures, and also the voice of the water. So he does help with healing. Once again, there is positive experiences in here, but you're working with something negative to do it. Is that evil is going to get real philosophical. Now, I never really had a whole lot of negative experiences with him. I'll say the antisocial thing was another constant at state. But it wasn't, I never had any serious drawbacks. Now, this next one, I'm debating on if I want to even explain the name. I'm not going to say the name of this one. And the reason why is because this was one of the worst spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life. And I do not say that lightly. I was almost not here anymore, and I'll explain that, because of this spirit and because of my own actions. At the end of the day, this spirit didn't do it to me. I was misguided. I did something that was not how you operate. And I almost paid for that shit. And I'll explain that. So, same house I was living in. Now, a little bit more backstory into where I lived there. It was a Craigslist home, and so I lived in a detached house in the back that I paid a lot more for because I didn't want to live in a room, with a bunch of fucking hooligans right next door to me. I've been there, done that when I was locked up. I'm good. So one of the guys that lived in there, he was part of the Aryan fucking Brotherhood. We had another dude in there that was like mixed, so they were always going back and forth in there. Another dude there who was like Korean. And I made some videos back that you guys might actually remember some of that. The Dybbuk box video that I made was when I lived in that house. So my point being was that there was a lot of shenanigans, a lot of foolishness that happened in the home. And the owner of the house tried to fuck me one day. Not physically, but tried to screw me, I can't, it was out of some money or something like that, and I said, all right, bitch, watch this. And so I took a jar and I wrote the sigil of the spirit on there, and I put some other things in there that were designed to just cause fucking depression, right? You were going to be so fucking sad you weren't going to leave your room. Fuck you, and so I did all this stuff, put it together. And then here's where I fucked up, okay? In other traditions, this is different. But in this one, nah, I spit into it to show like, I'm spitting on you, whatever. It's symbolic magic. But all that did was tie me to the work. There was no personal concern of the other person. There was nothing that tied them to this. And so, boom, tied it up, spoke all these horrible things into it. And then I put it down and I buried it at the window of this person, okay? That night, it was like my room became, 50 shades darker than normal. and my mind wasn't working right. You know, at the time I was dating my ex, and my phone had never not delivered a call unless I was out of service or something, you know. But I was pretty sure I was gonna kill myself that night. And ooh, I don't know if I could say that on YouTube. Man, all right, so this video is probably gonna get age restricted. Anyway, I was pretty sure I was going to delete that night. You know what I mean? And so I called my girl like 11 times. All of the calls on my end, you know, brr, 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 ringing, you know? And then finally, I tried to call my mom, and I called her like 3 times. The first 2 times it didn't work, and I said, you know what? This is it, man. Nobody answers. Whatever. She answered, and she said, hey, you know, sounded all happy. And I told her, I was like, look, I've been trying to call. Where you at? You know, she's like, I just got this call. Like, I didn't get any other calls from you. Same thing with my ex. No calls from me. No missed calls, nothing. You know, and it was so bad. Like, when I tell you I was uncontrollably crying, like I just felt broken, you know. And that feeling was, I wouldn't have wished on that person for what they did, you know. So it was so horrible that I got out of the house and I left that night. I came back a few nights later, and the feeling didn't leave. It was still in that house. But at this point, at least I had the discernment to know, okay, this is in this home. This is here. You know, if I leave, I'm fine. You know, like my mind's not going to be working against me in the same way. And so I moved. I didn't know how to fix my problem. I didn't know how to fix what I created. And so I left something like that. It's in a home. And I'll tell you, I'm sure I've paid for that. You know, I almost paid for it that night. I left. I didn't have what it took to be able to control something like that. And the reason I'm telling you guys this, because I don't, and I will never speak on bad work that I've done to people or good work that I've done to people. That's between me, them, and God, you know. But the reason I had to explain this one is because I know how some people will come to this. I know how some people will think, because I was that person, you know. And I implore you to find either guidance in this if you're not willing to look for something else. There are other things out there that will cause change rapidly. You know, even those wicked spirits that can do all kinds of crazy stuff, turning people into animals, shape-shifting, stuff that you guys won't believe. You know, there are spirits out there like that are not contractual demons. You know, demons. But if you're so fucking set on the Goetia, have some guidance with it. You know, don't practice that shit by yourself. You know, the Order of the Golden Dawn, and there are some other places that that do practice a lot of that, you know, kind of mixed in with Cometicism. And there are initiations that put these this information, this knowledge, these licenses in your mind. You know, otherwise it takes years to develop. You know, it does. It takes years to develop the hearing. And you have to be consistent. If you half-ass something a few times, they're probably not going to hear you, man. You didn't even call the right number. You see what I'm saying? But I'm not going to make this video too much longer. You know, I was really cautious about this video because, you know, this stuff is real, man. And I know, like I said, how I would have watched this video years ago. You know, from that place of skepticism, and thought this was the coolest shit in the world. You know, I still think some demons are pretty fucking cool. You know, God, and it sounds terrible. Not that I work with them, you know, but the concept that there are, you know, forces for good and bad, you know, and some of them can do some crazy shit. You know, it's fascinating. Fascinating, I guess, is a better word. You know, but there are a lot of good spirits out there, amazing ones that can do all kinds of great change without the risk of a tower card in your life, of your shit just completely falling apart, you know. But yeah, man, I'm gonna wrap the video up here. If you guys have any in-depth questions, you know, regarding this, you know, let me know. you know, the book is very detailed. It explains the tools that you need, you know, the symbols that you need to draw, the evocations for each of these spirits. But I would do more research on anything that you decide to call. You know, I'm also going to tell you, don't do this shit in your home or somebody else's home, for God's sake. Go out to the woods. You know, go somewhere where you can walk away if you let something out, and it's free to kind of fucking just do whatever. Go get lost somewhere, you know, but don't put that shit in your home. You know, other than that, if you guys have any other questions, you know, let me know. I'll put out another poll this week and we'll make something else. You know, I appreciate you guys watching if you stuck around this far, and you know, this will be probably the most serious video I've made on the channel so far, so we'll see how it does. You know, if these videos aren't getting a crazy lot of attention, I might do some more story times because there's a lot that goes into this. But you guys take care. Be safe. Have a good rest of your day.